Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.
Welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry. It's my pleasure to have in studio today Associate Professor of Archaeology at MARC, that's the Micronesian Area Research Center at the University of Guam, Dr. Mike Carson. Mike, welcome back to Your Humanities Half Hour.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Well, the last time you were here with your wife, we were talking about your work at the House of Taga in Tinian. And today we're going to change our attention a little bit to another part of the Marianas, and that's Guam. Tell us a little bit about your latest project there.
Okay. My latest work in Guam has actually been something I've been doing for a number of years. It's been a little more than 10 years so far, sustained project. And it's only recently that we've feel really confident about sharing, all this new information and making sense of all of this. And this is at Ritidian. It's the northern point of Guam, and it's in part of the Guam National Wildlife Refuge. And the work I've been doing there over the years has been just to learn what is the archaeology of this place. One of the reasons it took so long is because there's so much to learn there. Every time period of Chamorro archaeology and history is represented there, from the very first time people lived in the islands all the way up through the Spanish contact period with a Jesuit mission that was at this place at Ritidian, and everything in between. So there's more than 3,000 years of continuous human occupation and cultural activity in this one place. And each time period has its own distinctive archaeological signature that we find in different layers under the ground, and with their own diagnostic types of artifacts, like their own certain types of pottery or shell beads or other things that we know date to certain periods. And then we confirm that with radiocarbon dating to know exactly what calendar year. So we have the oldest around 1500 BC all the way up through the AD, 1600s, and ending, about the year 1700 with the removal of people into the more easily controlled Spanish villages at that time with the Reducción program.
It sounds like an incredibly rich archaeological site. How did it first come to the attention of archaeologists?
Okay, archaeologists have known about the Ritidian area, ever since. The first official archaeologist was Hans Hornbostel, who also worked in the Northern Marianas, and that was in the 1920s. And Hans Hornbostel found sites all over the Marianas, and in the Ritidian area in particular, he noted a dense concentration of latte all along the coast there. And he also excavated in a cave far up in the limestone cliff up there. In addition to that, he documented the ruins of the Spanish, the Jesuit missionary outposts, and he excavated at some latte as well. But at that time, in the 1920s, archaeologists did not know about anything older than what they see on the surface, anything older than the latte sites. And it was only much more recently that we've come about that. But there's been a number of other archaeologists before me who have worked at Ritidian, mostly surveying on the surface, looking where do we find latte sites, and finding that, yes, this area does have many latte, and they seem to be in these distributions of villages, but it was so dense with vegetation and difficult to access that not much more than that ever happened. You'll find maybe one paragraph of text and a map that's, like a big circle on a map saying there's latte in here. And that's pretty much all we had going up until about 1990. And at that time, the Ritidian area had been, for a long time actually, had been the naval base, though, what was called NAVFAC Ritidian, and it was being decommissioned. So in the late 1980s and by 1990, there was a report done by Hiro Kurashina and others, which was kind of a groundbreaking work at the time. They incorporated a number of different scientists together, like Dick Randall studying the geomorphology and the coastal ecology and the coral reefs, as well as the archaeologists and ethnographers and historians working together. So at the time, that was a really novel approach. And today we just sort of take it for granted. But we owe a lot to Hiro Kuroshina and his team who did that. And based on their work, we realized that there's much more here than we thought. But they were restricted to a little footprint, where they could work with the Navy base being decommissioned. And it was in about 2005. I was asked to do some emergency work at the refuge. Some things had been disturbed accidentally by pigs rooting around, and they needed an archaeologist in a hurry to come
by
help.
Pigs, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Unfortunately, by pigs. No,
I'd never heard of that being a reason for disturbance of an archaeological site before. So that's interesting to add that to the list. War, development, and pigs.
Yeah, and pigs.
Okay.
Yeah. So we can add that, and it does happen. So, and being so ecologically minded and careful, they wanted an archaeologist to come help. So I did, and I loved the place. I had visited, of course, before and never really had an opportunity to be an archaeologist at Ritidian. So this was just so exciting in my life, and developed a good relationship and said, is it okay if I started an official program here? And people were very supportive, and we worked with the Guam Historic Preservation Office and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on, okay, what do we need to do in terms of permits and everything? And so ever since then, that's what I've been doing, for the major part of my research in Guam. And it's just, it's evolved, over these years with different personnel, in the different government offices and everywhere, and myself learning more about archaeology.
So paint a picture for us. Take us back in time, I guess. What was life like as you understand it at Ritidian?
Okay. Well, the oldest sites there, let's start at the beginning. The oldest sites are when the first people ever came out to live in the Marianas. So there were a few sites in Guam, a few in Tinian and Saipan, maybe in Rota, although we don't yet confirm that. So there's a few sites being inhabited in these islands, and one of those was at Ritidian. And at that time, sea level was higher than today. The coasts and the coral reefs were very different. The coral reef that exists today is not the same coral reef even, it's a different formation. So life was very different back then, and no other people were living in the islands. So it's a daring group doing something that never had been done before, but a few groups. One of those groups was at Ritidian. And what I found was deep beneath the ground, the ancient beach. And so I just followed that ancient beach to see where was it people were living. Not everywhere, just in a small area we finally discovered where that was. And it just so happens that with me working on that to verify this ancient deposit were some really, really special people who I was just so lucky they were with me. And we happened to be doing a training session for Historic Preservation Office personnel from Saipan and also from Palau who came to work on this site. So
Nice.
It was just really great that they could be there when this discovery was made.
Yeah.
Which is like the earliest Chamorro site in the region, at least for Guam. And there's other equally early sites in Saipan and Tinian, but it was just wonderful we could do this together. And what we found there was evidence that, yes, people really were living right on this ancient shoreline. So they would have been on like stilt-raised houses right at the water's edge. And they were eating certain kinds of, clam shells that no longer exist today. You'll find them in actually, they do exist, but in very, very few places, some swampy areas that we have today. So this tells us that
imply then that maybe that was a swampy area at that time?
Yes. I was just about to say that.
Oh, okay.
that this was a shallow water environment, and we also find like it's similar to a seagrass. The scientific genus is the Halimata. So the Halimata species of algae that were growing in this shallow water environment. So it's like this meadow of Halimata and these Anodara clam shells and things. That's the kind of environment this was at that time, and that was the primary food resource.
Really? Versus fish? Or
Well, fish, of course, but
okay.
Shellfish are easier to gather. Everyone can do it, right? And it's a high protein content and reliable, right? So that's the primary protein resource. Also, we do find some fish and bird bone. What we don't yet know is about the plant foods. Of course, people were eating, some sort of dietary starch and carbohydrate. We presume it was things like banana and breadfruit and others. One of the findings, though, I'll get to in a moment, confirms about coconut, which is a coconut grater that we found dating to this is Guam's oldest coconut grater, and I believe it's also the Marianas' oldest coconut grater. And it's made of a piece of shell that's like very colorful and artistic even.
Interesting.
Yeah, but that wasn't found at the habitation site. That was found just a little bit distant from there. In addition to the habitation where people were living were two caves, which are very special caves at Ritidian. And many people know about them. Maybe you've heard of them yourself. They're decorated with rock art, actually lots of rock art inside, different colors, red, white, and black pigments, and different designs, handprints, human figures, and things that we don't understand, shapes that we don't know. So very special places. And just outside those, not inside the caves, but outside, under like an overhang area where the water drips down and where it's shady and cool, we found these little patches that were just barely above sea level, at 3,500 years ago. Little patches where people were doing special things. They weren't living there, but they were, we don't know exactly what they were doing, but they were depositing behind very specialized kinds of artifacts, pottery with special kinds of decorations that we don't see very often, in different shapes of pottery with handles and foot rings and
so
things that we don't ordinarily
ceremonial or religious.
Yeah, very likely, although it's difficult to say precisely what people were doing, but it's specialized. And they were not eating the same kinds of foods that they eat at the habitation site. They're eating and depositing different kinds of foods.
Interesting.
And among those things was the coconut. That decorative sort of coconut grater was also in there, and many shell beads and bone artifacts as well. So people are using the caves for special purposes very early, right at the beginning of time of people living in the islands. And what was so fun about this discovery was it made us realize that people really are, full people with lively cultures and society. We tend to think as archaeologists just about the technological, facts and surviving, in the earliest time. But these people knew how to survive, and they regarded their environment in a very special, intimate way. And the caves were special places to them, and they respected them in their own way. And we also know they were very well aware of the entire island environment, finding different kinds of stone and clay resources to make the tools that they made. And they must have, been exploring throughout the islands just to find those raw materials. And so these caves also were part of that world where they lived. And it could have been something spiritual or religious from the very beginning of time. It's not something that, suddenly happened later in time. This was always there from the very beginning. So that's an important reminder to us about the ancient Chamorro culture. And
go ahead.
It's just been exciting to do that. And what I wanted to mention is I intentionally did not excavate at the caves early on when I started my work. I wanted to excavate other places.
And why is that?
And that's because I wanted to learn about regular life,
right?
Daily life in the village area where people live, and do their ordinary activities before going to the cave. Because in most cultures of the world, and even today, caves are special
Special
and
places.
revered places.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to skew my idea of the archaeological record by digging in the caves and not really understanding what made them special.
Mhm.
So now I'm able to understand it a
By
little
comparing
better.
the two sites.
By comparing. And so that's one of the advantages of having a long-term relationship with an archaeological site, working for many years, is that you can do that. It's rather luxurious to be able to do this. And there's no pressure, there's no hotel being developed or, a road being built. But we do have a possibility of a military firing range coming in just above the area. And that's another set of issues that still needs to be discussed and developed.
Well, we're speaking today with Dr. Mike Carson, Associate Professor of Archaeology at MARC at the University of Guam, talking about archaeological discoveries at Ritidian, Guam. And we'll learn more from him after this break.
Hafa Day, this is Eulalia Villagomez of the Northern Marianas Humanities Council. Did you know that you can donate up to $5,000 to the Humanities Council through the CNMI Education Tax Credit Program? Donations from individuals and corporations qualify and can be used to offset your local wage and salary tax, BGRT, and earnings tax. Call our office at 235-4785 to see how you can support humanities programs in our community and obtain a tax credit for your donation. Thank you, and Sizus Masi.
Welcome back to your Humanities Half Hour. Our guest today is Dr. Mike Carson, Associate Professor of Archaeology at MARC, the Micronesian Area Research Center at the University of Guam, talking about his archaeological expedition, which has been going on over a number of years at Ritidian in Guam. Dr. Carson, one of the things I understand that makes this site unique is that it kind of provides an opportunity to understand or to see clearly how latte structures in a village were situated in relation to each other and maybe give a better idea of what life was like. Yeah. Is that true?
Yes, that's absolutely true. You heard correctly. On the what we call the eastern side of the refuge, going toward the Henopsin side, we recently, rediscovered the latte village out there. It's been known for a long time, but it just hasn't been studied in detail. And so one of the Fish and Wildlife workers, Brian Leon Guerrero, and I were just exploring the area and happened to come across it and then decided that it's time that we studied this properly. And so Fish and Wildlife Service gratefully supported, doing a thorough survey and documentation of this latte village. And it's a wonderful little snapshot in time, dating to about the 1600s is when it was built. And then, as you know from Mariana's history, by the end of the 1600s, people were forced out. And there was actually a Jesuit mission right at Ritidian. So this is not very close to that Jesuit mission. It's a bit farther away. If you're walking, it's about half an hour to walk there. And after you walk out, we've cleared a trail and we've cleared some of the latte sites, so you can get a sample of what the village was like. You won't see every single latte set, but you'll see I think 8 or 9 that are in good condition, and others that are maybe not in very good condition. So you can see what happens as these houses decay, and you can see the relationships between them, and you can understand what makes each one unique. So at this time, like in the 1600s, people have been making latte houses for a number of centuries already. So it's an opportunity to see, what people had done with that technology and how could they express themselves with the latte architecture. So we're not seeing, the wooden structures and things. We're seeing the latte, the haligi and the tasa, just the stone remains and the distributions of materials around them. But you're able to see that some were made with certain, dressed or prepared faces, on the front sides of the stones.
Which direction they were facing?
Yeah, so you know which way they were facing. Well, it helps us understand how things were oriented and how the house would have been approached, from the front or the back or the side. And we also see where this activity areas were. Where were people cooking versus having their workshops or their garbage debris piles, right, are in different places oriented around the houses. And it's not just the houses. There are, like I said, workshops. There's a number of other caves in that area that were used, again, for specialized purposes, but during the Laddie period, for sure. We have good dating on that. So and also we found a number of places where there's possible quarries of where people were obtaining the stone for making the latte, and workshops for working on the stones for making the latte, and water sources where there's water seeps that go out to the oceans. We were able to understand what the environment was like for people living at that time. Very volatile and important time in Chamorro history in the 1600s, when there was this Spanish contact and life was changing. But we get to see what was it like at that time, the last time when this culture was, really,
unencountered.
Yeah, unaffected. I want to say. I don't want to say intact, because Chamorro culture is still intact. It's just different.
Changes over time.
It's just different. Yeah. It's adapted. Yeah. It's adapted to these different circumstances that were sort of forced upon people. So this is the last time when people were not forced to live in a different way. And we had so many groups come out to see the site from University of Guam and other places. And what's especially good to see is the Chamorro studies and Chamorro language students who come to the site and start to learn, okay, how would we use the Chamorro language to describe what we're seeing and what life was like to live here, at the time when it was a Latte village. And that's the kind of thing I like to see. And it is open, to the public to go there, but by special arrangement, because it's an archaeological site, it can't just be open for
at
everybody. And remember, this is a federal. So how can
somebody make arrangements if they'd like to take a tour?
Yeah, it is a federal property, so they have special rules. So you would need to contact the Fish and Wildlife Service. So that's the Guam National Wildlife Refuge. Okay. And as long as you call ahead of time, they will have a new program starting later this month. We're kicking off a new program where the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will have tours of the Laddie site and also of the caves. So there's a cave tour and a Laddie site tour where you're guided, and shown how to be respectful of the sites, and people are with you to share good information. And that's the first and the third Saturday of every month. And they're kicking it off this month. And this is in partnership with a number of groups like Guampedia and others in Guam who are helping to make this possible. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is so overwhelmed financially, and they have limits to what their staff can do. So their staff do as much as they can, but they do need help. So that's where Guampedia and others become so important in supporting these kinds of activities. So we're kicking it off this month, and I hope people can come out to visit as much as you can. It's not just a one-time thing. The refuge is open every day of the year, except for federal holidays. There are some trails that are open, that are self-guided tours, so you can do some things on your own, but others you'll need to make some special arrangement, and everyone is welcome to be part of it. When I'm available, then I lead tours myself. I love doing this and learning from the people who are on the tours. It's not just me sharing my knowledge. I learn from other people who come out and share their knowledge with me, and it helps me be a better archaeologist and interpreter of the site.
Well, it must have really been a great opportunity to be able to work on this site, especially over such a long period. Tell us a little bit about what your work at MARC involves.
Okay. Yeah, currently my work at MARC is with a great group of people who all do different things, with the Spanish documents or library resources, and studying, the photograph collections, and so many other things with children's book series we have, and I work in the archaeology office, and currently, like my current assignment is about public outreach and engaging with the community to get people interested and involved in not just in archaeology, but in cultural heritage and history and things related to archaeology. Just getting people out to see sites like what we have at Ritidian, or to just to learn more through the many resources that are available at the National Park Service, at the Historic Preservation offices, a number of books and publications that you can find about archaeology. Most of them are free, even online. If you just search with a few keywords, that are pretty obvious, like, Marianas and archaeology, or, Guam, or even specific sites like Ritidian, or others like the House of Taga, or others in Tinian and Saipan, you will find these things, or even just search at MARC or at the Guam National Wildlife Refuge, and you will find these resources. And most of them are available for free, and it's a lot to learn, and not just from me, but from many other people as well. I encourage everyone, to start learning more about the latest archaeological findings. And speaking of that, Mark right now is working on a pictorial book about the Ritidian site. So the idea is, a large-sized book, so we can have nice large-sized pictures of what the sites and the artifacts look like, with good it's not like a big wordy academic book with a lot of text. It's a limited amount of text, just to aim to share the basic information and encourage people to come up with their own ideas about these sites and artifacts, and about Chamorro archaeology and history. So that's something Mark is working on now. It should be done later in this year, but I don't want to promise exactly a date on that. But we can say 2016. That is safe to say. But there's many other things that Mark does as well about history and culture. And I think I mentioned the children's books series that's just started, that are in Chamorro language. So I encourage people to look out for that. There should
that
be a
looks
book,
like a good resource.
Yeah, there should be a book launched soon about the first in that series.
Well, I want to ask a very non-academic question as we come down to the end of our show. In your work that you've conducted so far at Ritidian, what would you say is the coolest thing that you've come across or discovered, or maybe has sparked a question? What's been the coolest thing in your opinion?
Oh, everything is good. In archaeology, we don't put value judgments on anything. For me, the greatest thing about working at Ritidian is not the archaeology itself, but it's within the last year or two, especially, that so many people are interested in learning what the archaeology means to their lives today. That they can come see the sites, or learn something, or see the artifacts, or visit the caves and learn something about the past, even if to Chamorro people is very special because it's their own past and their own identity. But there's people from all over the world who come and are deeply touched, and their life is never the same again after they visit this site. So I encourage everyone to come experience this firsthand. It's a very good experience to be there. And I don't want to give away too much, but when people visit the site, they feel very special about what this means, that people have lived there for so long and have adapted to so many different things that have changed through time, yet still this is such a beautiful place. And how did this beautiful place come to be, and how can we maintain that? What can we learn from the people in the past who had this kind of place that they maintained for so long over so many challenges? Because right now we're facing kind of a crisis ourselves about populations increasing and changing climate and other things, and we need to start thinking about our future very seriously. I think Ritidian is one of those places where you can see that, and feel how important it is, and learn something about what we can do in our lives today.
Mike, thank you for your time today. Any final thoughts before we go?
I want to say thank you for making the time. I'm just so happy people are interested in these things. I encourage everyone to get out and learn a little more about archaeology in general, and specifically about the Marianas.
Well, it sounds like a great field trip for me and my sister next time I go to Guam, because she's from Guam. So thanks for letting us know about the first and third Saturday of the month. If people are interested in going to this Ritidian site, they can contact the U.S. Fish and Wildlife there on Guam, correct?
That's right. At the Guam National Wildlife Refuge, they're the people to contact officially.
All right. Well, our guest today has been Dr. Mike Carson, Associate Professor of Archaeology at MARC at the University of Guam. And this has been your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
This program was supported by a We the People grant awarded to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.